Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Cindie Chavez here. Today is Wednesday, October the 31st, 2018. It's 8 a.m. New York time. That's 5 p.m. Los Angeles time, and it is. I think they're now in regular time. So in London, it's 12 noon. So happy lunchtime to those of you who are in London time. And we're also live streaming this to the Law of Attraction Change My Life group. So we're reaching out on a number of different channels here, a number of different functions, and that's exciting to me, Cindie, because it means we're reaching more people. We're helping more people get their daily dose of happy. That makes me happy.
Very good.
Yeah, good stuff going on. So how you doing? You told me before the podcast you got a little more sleep. That's got to be good.
Yeah. I did not sleep well the night before. I never have trouble falling asleep. It's that
Mm,
4 or 5 hours afterwards I wake up sometimes,
yeah.
and so last night much better, and woke up this morning feeling like I had actually gotten some sleep. So that's always a better way to start
Oh
the
yeah,
day than
much
the
better.
alternative, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm
Yeah, the
feeling good.
alternative is like, oh God, do I have to go through the day now? But no, when you have the sleep, it makes it so much easier. So that's a good thing. So
Yeah. So
we're continuing our conversation about Neville Goddard's book, "Feeling is the Secret," and this is I guess the third. Is this the third book we've done? Third or fourth? I can't remember which. But
I don't remember either, and so much of Neville's work kind of weaves in with everything, because he has concepts that he'll repeat. So when we when I was looking for where could we go next, because we've gotten comments of really enjoying Neville, so I thought, okay, let's keep going because I love Neville. And I went back and looked in the archives because I was like, which ones have we covered and which ones haven't we covered? Because I wasn't sure if we'd covered this one. But I think this is the third one. So what we did was we took some bits and pieces out of The Law and the Promise because he's got such great stories in that one, letters that people have written, but we haven't read the entire book. We've pulled out some testimonies, and then
yeah,
we
we'll have to do that one more completely sometime. Yeah,
right. So we did Awakened Imagination and Out of This World, and this one is
right.
Feeling is the Secret.
Sounds about
So
right. Yeah, I
yeah.
remember we did last spring, I think it was, we did kind of a general retrospective on Neville without focusing on a particular book, but I think we drew from a couple different sources of his there. So,
Right. So Neville's gotten some love from us. Yeah.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm learning to appreciate him more and more, especially when you have the Neville decoder ring. That helps a lot. Uh,
Yes.
but I'm beginning to appreciate there's a lot of depth to the guy, and it's good stuff. So,
Yeah,
um,
it is. It's good stuff, and it's slightly different perspective occasionally from maybe what we get with Abraham Hicks.
right?
It all does seem to, what's that saying? It all comes out in the wash. It does
Mm.
kind of seem like, okay, this is very, very congruent with Abraham Hicks' teaching and most other New Thought or Law of Attraction teachings. But there are some little twists and turns in there and methods, and that's what I like about Neville is his ability to be very clear about a specific method. And so I know we've been practicing some of those, and that's been really great for me. I mean, I can just feel it. But you were talking about a movie
Mm. Yeah,
that
it was
had
actually
some good
recommended to me.
information.
Yeah, it was recommended to me by Louis D'Souza, who does the Monday morning podcast with me, called E-Motion, E-Motion. And I actually checked my library and found I could download it, which was really cool. I didn't know I could do that through the library. So with my library card, I got a download of the video. But watched that last night, and like I was telling you before the podcast, like any of these sources, it has its weaknesses, and I outlined what they were. Mainly that it was very repetitive for the first 15 minutes or so. But it did have some good stuff in it, and I think overall I would recommend it. Anyone who wants to take a look at that movie, it's a little long. I mean, they did it in 2 hours. They probably could have done it in 45 minutes and still, not left anything out. But nevertheless, the content is good, and it actually cued something that I was telling you about before the podcast. Recognition of something that you've told me about before, and Wendy Dillard has told me about. Others have mentioned too, the importance of when an emotion comes up that's not a good feeling emotion, not dismissing it, not putting it aside, but being ready for it and saying, "Hey, thank you for coming, and I'm ready to understand whatever the message is that you've got to tell me, and let's dive into it and find out what it is so that I can help you dissolve and go away." And that's I don't know why. For some reason, that's one of those things that kind of stuck in my mind in sort of an abstract sense, but I hadn't really integrated it. And there was something in the movie that just kind of clicked and said, "Oh, you got something really big you've been dealing with right now, and you're not integrating it. Come on, get with the
Well,
program."
you said something, and I was sitting over here when you said it. I went, oh my goodness, one of those things that's so easy to overlook, and that is when we have something in our life that we do on a regular basis, or that we've experienced, more than once and somewhat regularly, and it's something we don't like, or it's something that causes us to go, ugh, it's that time again,
Yeah,
like,
right.
I mean, it could be something small, I hate mopping floors, right? It's like, ugh, but I do it all the time. And so what you said was that, so, it's time to do this, and that emotion shows up again, and I just think I don't delve into it because, well, it's here because there's this thing I don't want to do.
Yeah, pretty much.
And it's so easy to let that be the reason without taking the next step of, delving into it. So, maybe it doesn't have to be like this. Maybe this doesn't have to be the thing I don't like to do. Maybe I can find a way to alleviate this. But we so often just think, ugh, this again. And right? And when you said it, I was recognizing in myself, oh yeah, like that happens, sure. And so because we're talking about, because we're reading Neville and we're talking about feelings, and you brought up,
Feeling
and
is the
I
sequel.
didn't know there was that movie. I'd never heard of it. And
Mm.
I don't think I thought I really invented this, but I often will explain people emotion, energy in motion. I don't know if
Hmm.
that's what they were saying because you said it's motion. I don't know, but
It was that was the theme basically. Yeah,
yeah,
that
just to
we are all
explain it,
energy. Yeah.
and that emotions need to move.
Hmm.
So, like sadness often comes with tears. There's a response, and I read an article once that our body builds up certain types of toxins. I kind of joke, we are just like a sack of chemicals, right? So our body builds up certain toxins that can only be cleared by crying.
Mm.
Those toxins get released in tears, and that is it. And it's like, how many people never allow themselves any tears,
Oh, geez, yes.
right? And yet, sadness, that's one of the ways sadness moves in the body. And so, certain, well, I've heard it said about certain groups of people and how they grieve and mourn, and other groups. I heard someone say, "Have you ever been to a white person funeral? Everyone's stuffing down their feelings and barely sniffing and not moving
Hmm.
and choking it down, right?" But grieving and mourning, it needs to move through the body, and it does that often with keening and crying. And so every emotion has a way of moving in the body. It doesn't mean we have to get inappropriate or do anything that we're going to be sorry about, but I always make sure to make that disclaimer with anger, right? It's like there are appropriate ways to process anger. Some of, we can start with just saying, I feel really angry about this. We
Yeah.
don't have to throw things, yell, shoot anyone,
Nope.
do anything violent. It doesn't
Nope.
have to be violent. And so, but if we let the emotions move, and I think that's what the E is, right? It's like energy in motion. It's like, so I'm really actually excited about this, even though I know it's going to take me maybe 2 hours to get 45 minutes of information.
Well, you also mentioned sadness, and there was a really cool, I don't want to spoil the movie for you, but there was one really, really cool scene where the two names that I recognized in the movie were Neil Donald Walsh, who of course is the author of the Conversations with God series of books,
Right.
and also Dr. Joe DiPenzio, who has a number of books out about the relationship between mind and body and all the
Yes.
different ways that our mind directly impacts the body and can be experimented with and tested with from a scientific perspective. And I think it was Dr. DiPenzio who was telling this part, but I could be wrong. He was talking, whoever was doing this part of the presentation said, that you can do muscle testing, and I'm sure you're familiar with muscle testing,
Yes.
to basically indicate to yourself whether or not you have a strong positive emotional reaction to something or a negative reaction. And if there's a negative reaction, it's a clue that, okay, this is something you need to explore further. Well,
Mm.
he said not only does it work with humans, it works with animals. And as an example, they gave us an example of a horse who was lame. And veterinarians had been looking at the horse. They couldn't figure out why he was lame. There was no clear indication for it. So this practitioner, I think it was Dr. DePenzia, um, went to see the horse and set up a kind of a human chain to the horse so that he could do muscle testing with the horse. And what he did was he had his subject person, who kind of was the intermediary, holding his hand on the horse, I think on the horse's flank. And then the other arm he was using as the muscle testing. And so the person who was running the test, so to speak, would push down the guy's arm after he asked the question of the guy, and the signal of the question would get through to the horse by touching the horse. And he started asking the horse, why are you having this? Are you angry? No. Are you frustrated? No. Are you upset? No. Are you this? The whole list of negatives. He couldn't find it. Finally, he said, "Are you sad?" And the answer came back, "Yes." Okay, so you're sad. What are you sad about? Are you sad about not being able to run? No. Are you sad about not having enough food? No. Are you sad? I mean, he went through this whole list and couldn't figure out what it was. Are you sad about your fellow horses? No. Are you sad about the people who own you? No. Are you sad about other animals here who are part of the farm? No. He was running out of ideas. He finally saw a bird flying by. He said, "Are you sad about birds?" And the horse said, "Yes."
What?
And so he delved into that further. And long story short, what he learned is that the horse had been in his stall and had observed a small infant bird falling out of a nest in the barn, landing on the ground. And because the bird was so small and so newborn, couldn't take care of itself, and he watched it die, and it made him sad, and he couldn't do anything about it.
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow.
And he walked the horse through, basically expressing that feeling. And the next thing they did, they took the horse out in the meadow, and the horse was running along like normal. So he had healed himself by expressing the sadness.
Oh, that's wow.
Isn't that
First,
something?
I thought you were going to tell me, are you sad about birds? Yes, it's like the horse wants to fly. I was trying to figure
Isn't
out
it?
where are you going with this.
I mean,
Wow. So it was
isn't that
sadness
amazing?
over. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So
Yeah,
excited to watch it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that just, whoa, I watched that one. That blew me away.
Well, the whole big idea about tapping. We've talked about tapping before. And a lot of people know it's abbreviated EFT.
Right.
So you're tapping on these meridians and you're asking yourself questions and you're making affirmative statements, and there's many, many different methods now that it's blown up so huge. But EFT is emotional freedom technique. That's what that stands for. And that's also what it has to do with and we've seen, I mean, there's plenty of testimonies of people getting healed from physical, you're talking about the horse being lame and then running, from people being healed of physical things, pain and other physical suffering, once they are able to release the emotion that it's connected to, emotional freedom techniques. So feelings are a big deal. Emotions are a big deal. I'm glad that we're talking about it. And the idea that not only can we feel better emotionally and mentally, but physically as well. A horse is a big, strong animal. To think that the horse was unable to run because of an emotion like sadness, that's a big deal.
It is.
Yeah, that's
It's an
amazing.
eye opener, really.
Yeah. Well,
Because it's not only do animals have emotional feelings and very powerful ones, but they're so powerful they can actually render a horse lame.
our emotions are incredibly powerful. And
Hmm.
I've for years, and I am not the person that owns tons of animals, I know people that have dozens of animals. I have only had a few pets in my life, but
Plus an owl flying past your window.
yes. Well, I feel very connected to birds, and I've had some pet birds on occasion. I'm not crazy about keeping a bird in a cage, but I've
Yeah.
had some little dogs, and whenever I hear someone say, well, animals don't have emotion, I'm like, what? How can you even say, then you've never had a pet because,
Right.
or you've never had two pets that were close and had one of them die because
Mhm.
animals grieve, they definitely feel emotions. And
Mhm.
so I think that's a wonderful story. Now I'm excited to watch the movie. And I love the work that Joe DiPenzia does. I've
He's really good. Yeah.
delved into a little bit of his work, and I know I'm trying to think of the woman scientist. Is it Candace Pert that
Kurt. Yeah.
wrote?
Last name I couldn't get, but you're right.
Yeah,
Candace
is
Pert.
it Miracles of Emotion? Or wait, she did a
Molecules. Molecules of emotion.
molecules of emotion because she's a
Yeah.
scientist.
Right.
And I've always really loved the ideas that she was delving into, but I found her book difficult for me to get through just because it was very, very, it's not that it was like science I couldn't understand, but it was very, what's the word I'm looking for? Clinical, maybe?
Yeah.
And so I have read some of it, but I don't think I finished it, and I wanted to, but at the time it was just I just wasn't doing well with reading through it. And so Joe Dispenza's made it. Maybe it's just his writing style or his speaking style, but I've liked to have. I think it's the same information. I think they're all going for the same thing there.
Mm.
So that's
Well, the
been
thing I've noticed about Dr. Joe DiPenzia compared to Candace Pert, they both tell stories, but DiPenzia's stories are more frequent and more detailed.
maybe that's what it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted more stories
Yes.
when I was reading, and
We love
probably.
stories.
Probably I need to go back and pick that book up again, and I'd probably read it and say, why did I have trouble reading this before? I mean, I've done that with a number of books. I've done it with Neville. It's
Hmm.
like sometimes it's not the time to be reading a particular book. So I certainly don't want to dissuade anyone from picking up Candace Pert's Molecules of Emotion, and who knows, she may have something newer by now that's different, but all good stuff. All
Well,
good
actually,
stuff.
unfortunately, she passed a few years ago, so she's not going to be writing anything more in this life. But
Oh, but that was her last book?
I
I didn't
believe so.
know. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I thought.
Yeah, but it is a worthwhile read. I mean, yeah, you have to kind of be a little patient with the fact that she was a clinical researcher. I mean, she
Right,
was one of
right.
the original researchers to discover many of the neuropeptides that we know about. That
Yes.
she's like, well, she was on the leading edge of that stuff, so she did major work. And the book does a nice job of laying out stories. You're right, it has sort of that clinical approach to the way it's written, so that makes it a little bit tough. But you have to kind of get past that. But the stories are well worth it. They're really good stories.
Well, I'm going to put that on my reading list to read after these 20 books that are stacked over here.
Yes, I agree. The list gets a little long, doesn't it?
So many books, so little time. Well, speaking of time, I would love to get into Neville. Are there some promos that we'd like to do first?
Yes, and in fact, people are going to be surprised to hear that I am modifying the please subscribe promo a little bit because Carlos pointed out something to me yesterday. He said that both of his parents tried to subscribe to the podcast and failed because they found it too complex. And
Cool.
pointed out that Amazon, for instance, where he used to work, has perfected the one-click order system, which I agree is a wonderful idea. That the fewer clicks you can make people do, the better.
Oh, that
Um,
button's dangerous.
it is.
For
It is. You
someone
can
that
order.
loves books as much as me, it's really dangerous.
Oh yeah, you have to have a little self-control at times. But with that spirit in mind, I was thinking about it last night before I went to bed, and when I woke up this morning, I realized there is one thing I could do to simplify the process of subscribing by one step, and that is I am now going to start putting the subscribe links for both Android devices and for iPhone, iPad, iPod type devices in the descriptions of each of the shows that we do, both as a live description and the recording of the podcast afterward. So if you're, for instance, if you're listening to us do the broadcast here in the Facebook group, The Law of Attraction Changed My Life, look in the description of the post and you'll see a couple of links that you can click on for subscribing, depending what kind of phone you have. And if you're listening to the recorded podcast after the fact, you can do the same thing there. And we're also trying to put the videos up on YouTube, and we'll put links there as well. So no matter where you're seeing us, look in the description. And if it's not clickable, just copy and paste the link. The links are going to be pretty obvious. They look like your usual web links. But if you can't click it, just copy and paste it, and you'll be good. It'll make it very, very easy for you to subscribe to the podcast. At least a lot easier than it was before. Now, we haven't got down to a single click yet. There's still a couple clicks you have to do after you click the link that's in the description. But we've reduced it by one. You don't have to go to the homepage of the website anymore. So that's a good thing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, it's getting better all the time.
Yeah, that's right. It's improving.
And easier all the time. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that people give us a shout on social media somewhere. And just say, I've been listening to LOA today.
Well, even you couldn't subscribe before, but you succeed in subscribing today. Let us know that too. That's right. A good thing, you know.
Yeah. Oh, well, that would be great. Awesome. Well, we love it when you reach out and say hello and give us a shout. So we have been delving into Neville Goddard's book, Feeling is the Secret, and talking a lot about feelings and emotions. And I wanted to mention just quickly, before we start reading, I want to back up to the sentence before where we left off. What you feel you are, always dominates what you feel you would like to be. Therefore, to be realized, the wish must be felt as a state that is, rather than a state that is not.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, we were talking about I ams and I am nots, and talking about feelings, and I thought that where we left off yesterday was a really interesting conversation about feelings and emotions and the difference. And the idea that when we talk about, and I think Neville is going to address both of them, but when we talk about feelings, we use that word to describe emotions, and that's okay, that's correct. But also feelings can be just feelings. Yeah,
just feeling it, like touching it.
I remember a friend, actually, not a client, but years ago, going through a divorce, and it was one of those situations where everyone thought that they had a really happy marriage and was shocked that they didn't when they ended up divorcing. And she later said to me, every time I heard his car drive up in the driveway, I got a knot in my stomach.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a feeling, right? Or like feeling stress in your neck or your jaw, feeling tightness. Those are feelings. They may be connected to emotions, and I think that oftentimes they are connected to emotions that we're not willing to express. So they show up in the body as a feeling, or like the horse, right? Maybe he didn't have a way to express that sadness, and so it came out as, a physical condition. But there are also feelings that we can just recognize they're neutral, and I think these are the ones that sometimes we overlook, but they will be really good to tap into. So we were talking yesterday about that little vignette, the idea of creating a scene of what it would be like if our wish were, to come true. And that there are feelings in the scene. There are feelings right now. I can feel myself sitting in this chair. I can feel my hands on the top of the table. I can feel the temperature in the room. And none of those are emotional, and they're definitely not uncomfortable. Or sometimes it might get uncomfortable, right? Like I feel cold or whatever. But
then you get emotional, like, oh, geez, I'm so cold. Ah.
Right. So we should be aware of those things, and those things are really because they're not emotional and they're not, hopefully not painful, although pain can be a feeling. But just the neutral ones I'm talking about. Sometimes why should we pay attention to that, But when we're talking about using conscious methods to create reality, they may be important.
Well, that's why I'm thinking that they are important to pay attention to. I mean, you're right. We do dismiss them because they're just so commonplace. But those are the building blocks that we use when we want to create the vignette. And I was realizing that. just as you were talking about it right now, that so often I'm trying to create a vignette in my head or even in my heart or however you want to look at it. I'm trying to put it together and I'm having trouble piecing it together. And I'm realizing one of the reasons is I'm dismissing the little mundane things like you're describing, the things that are just, they don't have a strong emotional content to them, but I can feel the chair, I can feel the table, I can feel the notebook over here, I can feel the laptop, I can feel everything. I can feel that stuff, but I just dismiss it because I feel it all the time.
Right, and I'm thinking, if someone were, I don't want to get too far out, but like we've been talking about, and we're going to talk about with Neville, dreaming, sleeping, dreaming, and lucid dreaming, right? And the idea of like, am I dreaming? One of the ways that we can start becoming more aware of our dreams is to ask ourselves in our waking life, am I dreaming? And especially if something strange happens. But I'm thinking, if someone asked me right now, if you were to say to me, are you dreaming? What would I do to know, am I dreaming or not? Besides looking at a clock and then looking at the clock again, I may wiggle my toes in my shoes a little bit or touch the table or, it's like, yeah, I'm knocking on my desk. I can feel this chair. I'm not dreaming. This is all real. And so when we're trying to create reality,
It starts to get epistemological, though. It's like, okay, well, we all create our reality. So if I'm experiencing the reality, is it real?
Right? Well, I think it's like there are some cultures that take, like the Aboriginal cultures, they take the nighttime, the dreaming, much more seriously than we do. They actually kind of have it, in the other way, where we think dreams are just, it's just not real, and then real life is real. They kind of view it from the other perspective. So I think it's important for us to at least make the intention that we're wanting to become more aware of our feelings. And so when I say that, I'm not always just talking about, oh, you have to admit that you're sad. We have to realize we're feeling frustrated. I don't just mean uncomfortable emotions. I mean actual feelings. And he starts where we left off yesterday. This sentence starts with the word sensation. Sensation precedes manifestation and is the foundation upon which all manifestation rests. Like, I feel we could talk for an hour on that sentence, right? Because it doesn't say emotion.
No, it doesn't.
And you hear that a lot, right, when you hear people talking about law of attraction. And I'm not saying that it's not valid, but you do hear it a lot. It's like you have to feel the emotion of it. Like, fire up that emotion. I think, was it Jack Canfield that said, well, he said fire up your faith, but there was that idea of like really feeling it, feeling the emotion. Neville here is saying sensation, and I think that's a different thing. Do you?
Well, I think it's also much more important. And the reason I say that is, you'll see this in Facebook discussion groups all the time. People talking about, well, I don't know what my emotion is. I can't tell. And it's because whatever it is they're trying to visualize doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of emotional content with it. And so when we're trying to piece together what the scene is like, what the vignette is like, okay, we have one emotion, so that there's an emotion here, and there's a big blank here, and there's a big blank here, and there's a big blank here, because there's no emotions in those blanks, so we don't know what to fill them in with. But when we start realizing, oh, it's just, everyday feeling, the stuff that we feel, that we can touch, that we can sense, well, we can fill in those senses. Now it becomes easier to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, this is like so amazing to me because it's really a distinction from some of the other things that we hear. Yeah. And it's one of those things like we talked about this morning. It's so easy to overlook.
Oh, God, yes.
It's so easy to overlook the feeling of the floor beneath my feet. But when we think about Neville's example with his vignette, he talked about, there were two that I recall right off the bat. One of them was reaching out and shaking the hand of a friend in congratulations. So you're feeling the hand in your hand, and then the other one was walking up a flight of stairs. I mean, so you're feeling maybe the handrail in your hand. You're feeling your feet on the steps. He also talked about, just as an example one time, imagine there's a ladder in front of you, right? Was that the last book? So he was telling the difference between, he said, imagine watching yourself climb up a ladder. Then he said, imagine the ladder's right in front of you, and imagine you're climbing it. And it's so different because you're reaching out and holding on to the ladder with your hands, and you're going up the rungs with your feet. So this is all just sensation.
But it's
And of
also
course,
it's reminding me that because we take the sensations of life for granted so often, we actually discount them. And it makes me realize we need to spend more time appreciating our senses. I mean, our senses are wonderful.
yeah.
They give us tremendous information that most of the time we're processing the information, but we're forgetting where we got it from, you know? But we can smell things, we can taste things, we can see things, we can hear things, we can touch things. Those are really pretty cool things to be able to do. To be able to see, touch, hear, smell, and taste. I mean, that's amazing stuff. And yet we take it for granted. Well, maybe we should stop taking it for granted.
A practice that I started doing years ago is, and I will say I haven't been doing it lately because I've been doing the Neville practice, but it certainly doesn't have to be exclusive, and it only takes a second. But that was as I was falling asleep, or when I was getting ready for bed at the end of the day and turning the light off, shutting my eyes. I would think back on my day, and I would think of something that I appreciated for each of the senses. Like I heard a particular, maybe I heard someone, had a phone call and heard the voice of somebody I loved, and maybe I smelled some flowers and I tasted something, and I would go through all 5 senses, which it takes 10 seconds. But what I noticed, and I made a rule for myself, because at the beginning, every night when I did it, I would feel my little Maltese puppy's fur, and I would smell the coffee, and I would taste chocolate. You could really tell what was important to me, because every night it was the same story. And so I made a rule for myself. I was like, okay, it has to be different. It has to be different every night. You can't come in here and be thankful for the same 5 things that you've touched and tasted and smelled, and it has to be different. And so what I noticed happening maybe a week into it is that somebody had sent me roses, and there were big bouquet of roses on the table, and as I walked through the room and leaned down to smell them, I said, "Ooh, this can be the smell for tonight."
Oh.
And it hit me that all of a sudden in my daytime life, I was becoming very aware I was collecting sensations for the nighttime meditation, right? I was like, oh, okay, I've got that down. And so my senses started, my awareness of what I was hearing and tasting and seeing and smelling and feeling really opened up. It's like suddenly I was paying attention. And I think it's a wonderful exercise. And I really believe it played into my ability to manifest things.
It's a good idea. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having the same things over and over again, but you don't want to just stay there because you're not going to grow if you're doing that. And that's what you recognize, which is wonderful to recognize. And then you found this really cool way to start tying other things in. It's a good idea. I like it.
Yeah. So, you were talking about the importance of not overlooking, and like this is one of the ways that we can do that. It doesn't take very much time, right? So, okay, so let's dive into Neville. Neville says, sensation precedes manifestation and is the foundation upon which all manifestation rests. Be careful of your moods and feelings, for there is an unbroken connection between your feelings and your visible world. Your body is an emotional filter and bears the unmistakable marks of your prevalent emotions. Emotional disturbances, especially suppressed emotions, are the cause of all disease.
That needs an underline right there.
Mm-hmm. To feel intensely about a wrong without voicing or expressing that feeling is the beginning of disease, dis-ease, in both body and environment. Do not entertain the feeling of regret or failure for frustration or detachment from your objective results in disease. So that's
a confusing sentence, that last one. The way it's
do not
phrased.
entertain the perhaps I read it wrong. Do not entertain the feeling of regret or failure for frustration or detachment from your objective. Can you read it in a way that it makes better sense to you?
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I'm trying to do exactly what you're trying to do. Let me see if I can do it. Do not entertain the feeling of regret or failure for frustration or detachment from your objective results in disease.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Do not. So we
To read
needed
it just the
we
right way,
needed a
otherwise it doesn't make
comma.
any sense. Yeah, you need a comma, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
So frustration or detachment from your objective. And what's interesting is that I see that when we're disappointed and we push it away and don't delve into it so that we can clear it, that causes us to be detached, right? And that results in disease. So think feelingly. That's an interesting word. Think feelingly only of the state you desire to realize. Feeling the reality of the state sought and living and acting on that conviction is the way of all seeming miracles. All changes of expression are brought about through a change of feeling. And when he says expression here, I believe he's talking about manifestation, not facial expression. He's talking about reality being expressed. Do you read it that way?
I'm not sure. You got me wondering about it.
Mm-hmm. All changes of expression are brought about through a change of feeling. A change of feeling is a change of destiny. All creation occurs in the domain of the subconscious. What you must acquire, then, is a reflective control of the operation of the subconscious, that is, control of your ideas and feelings. I like this phrasing here about a reflective control. You know, it's not a pushing down control or shoving back in the corner control.
True.
It's reflective. It's okay to reflect on what's happening. We need to, actually, because if we don't, then we are just detaching and shoving it away.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. No, it's true.
Chance or accident is not responsible for the things that happen to you, nor is predestined fate the author of your fortune or misfortune. Your subconscious impressions determine the conditions of your world. The subconscious is not selective. It is impersonal and no respecter of persons. The subconscious is not concerned with the truth or falsity of your feeling. And we talked about this yesterday, right? That if we say over and over some statement about ourselves, you know, we say, I'm terrible at math. Oh, I'm awful at math. I've never been good at math. We hear that a lot. Or we hear, I'm terrible at remembering names. Oh, I never remember a name. I can't remember names. If we tell a story like that, our subconscious does not judge it. It just says, okay.
Yep.
All right. We don't got
one
thing I don't have to remember.
I'll commit that one to memory, guaranteed.
Right. So the subconscious isn't concerned, right? Sometimes if you make a statement like that, you may have a friend, right, that hears you or your spouse or someone say, well, that's not true. You're good at math. Why do you say that? Or that's not true. You remember names all the time. You reminded me of what so-and-so's name was the other day, right?
Which
but our subconscious doesn't do that.
Well, usually results in a dismissal, like, oh, no, I don't. So even though it was pointed out to you that you're good at it, you say, no, I'm not really good at it. And so you just reinforced it again.
But so other humans often are concerned with the truth or falsity of something we feel or something we say, right? But the subconscious isn't concerned with it. It just says, okay, all right, we can do that. It always accepts as true that which you feel to be true. Feeling is the assent of the subconscious to the truth of that which is declared to be true. I think that's pretty spot on. Because of this quality of the subconscious, there's nothing impossible to man. Whatever the mind of man can conceive and feel is true, the subconscious can and must objectify. Your feelings create the pattern from which your world is fashioned, and a change of feeling is a change of pattern.
He's expressing a view of subconscious mind that is very similar to the one that other people in the field, so to speak, subscribe to. It was a major part of the movie, E-motion, that the subconscious mind is the storage mechanism. In fact, some of the presenters said it was actually the body where the subconscious mind stores stuff. And you see this a lot. You see this idea of the subconscious mind as being kind of like a database. where all this data is stored, and then certain data is rewritten based on new input and so forth. But it's just like you said, it's just receiving the information, saying, "Yep, okay, yep, okay, yep, got it, yep, got it, okay, got it," over and over and over again. And I'm not sure how much of it is actually metaphor and how much of it is physical. I mean, is the physical body really where the subconscious mind is stored? I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe you have an idea about that. But the same
I don't
theme
know.
plays out over and over again. I keep seeing it over and over from different gurus, from different experts, from everybody in the field. They're all looking at it the same way.
Well, and you were saying yesterday, and we use this often, right? We use the computer analogy for people
Mhm.
and for our brain. And you were talking about like the hard drive where the information is just stored.
Right.
And now we may try to run a program and realize that it's full of bugs, but the hard drive just doesn't. It doesn't say, "Hey, there's something wrong with this program," right?
No, a bug from a hard drive is
Until
part of
we try
using.
to execute it, then we
Yeah,
realize, oh. And so the
from
subconscious
a
doesn't
hard drive
bring it
sees a
back.
bug the same way as it sees regular data. It's like numbers and stuff that you
Right.
store. So, okay, there's some stuff that we stored. It doesn't know the difference. It's not up to the hard drive to figure out the difference. That's what the
Yeah.
program's for.
And what's interesting is that you're saying we hear this over and over, the same idea. And Neville wrote this in 1944.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we didn't have all of the research, the scientific research, the brain research. We didn't have computers, so or at least not computers like we have today.
I
So
find it fascinating that Neville was actually a contemporary of Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill got all the attention, but Neville Goddard laid it out much more clearly than Napoleon ever did. Not that Napoleon Hill's stuff is bad, don't get me wrong. It's
yeah,
just that what Neville writes is a lot more precise than what Napoleon Hill wrote. Napoleon Hill's favorite thing to say was, "I don't have to explain this to you. If you know what I'm talking about, it'll be obvious to you." I mean, he didn't say it exactly that way, but that was the message. Okay, everyone who understands this stuff is going to get it. I don't have to tell them.
well,
But he
he
says,
he
"Well, no,
actually
I got to
he
tell you."
actually he really did kind of say it that way, right?
He
Because
did.
it was
Yeah,
over and over. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to tell you. You're just going to get it.
yeah.
It's like, wait a minute. Tell me,
Hey,
please tell
stop.
me. Neville's like, I'll tell them.
Yeah,
I'll tell them.
but he's the one who
So
got ignored. That's what's so mind-boggling about it. Oh well,
Napoleon Hill said, "You go ahead and tell them they're
they're
gonna
going to
ignore
ignore
you
you.
anyway."
They're going to relegate you to obscurity.
Oh well, I'm doing what I can to correct that. Okay, so
It's a good thing too.
the subconscious never fails to express that which has been impressed upon it. The moment it receives an impression, it begins to work out the ways of its expression. It accepts the feeling impressed upon it, your feeling, as a fact existing within itself, and immediately sets about to produce in the outer or objective world the exact likeness of that feeling. The subconscious never alters the accepted beliefs of man. It outpictures them to the last detail, whether or not they are beneficial.
Out pictures them. That's
Oh.
an interesting phrase.
I like
Out,
to use that word, and I use that word sort of often, and I'm wondering now, did I get it from Neville? Maybe I got it from Neville.
I have never heard that phrase. Out hyphen pictures. I mean, it's descriptive. Basically creating outside um, pictures or examples or realities, but it's well, it kind of expresses it nicely. It's basically saying that all the manifestations that turn into physical reality do so through the subconscious mind, and that's the word we use to describe that process.
Yeah, do you want to know what you believe and what you think about yourself and what your story is? Look around.
Yeah, right. Boy, is
So,
that true.
to impress the subconscious with the desirable state, you must assume the feeling that would be yours had you already realized your wish. In defining your objective, you must be concerned only with the objective itself. The manner of expression or the difficulties involved are not to be considered by you. Now, I think we're talking about the hows, right?
Sounds like it, yeah.
To think feelingly on any state impresses it on the subconscious. Therefore, if you dwell on difficulties, barriers, or delay, the subconscious, by its very non-selective nature, accepts the feeling of difficulties and obstacles as your request and proceeds to produce them in your outer world.
Doesn't that bug you when it does that?
Yesterday, I saw somebody in a discussion, in a law of attraction discussion. They said they were reminded of Esther saying, I hate the law of attraction. And I started laughing because I've never heard her say it, but I don't listen to Esther as much as everyone else. And I cracked up. I was like, I could totally hear. I mean, I can hear it in my imagination, right? I can imagine her saying, "Oh, don't you hate the law of attraction?" Yes, because of this right here. Because of our subconscious and its very non-selective nature. It's going to just accept the feeling of difficulties as our request and say, here you go. Here you go. Have a difficulty. No.
Yeah, right. I can tell you that I've never been a person who loved to do computer programming, but I have dabbled in it. I've done some minor programming, so I have some sense of what's involved in the process of programming something. And there's nothing like writing a programming script of some kind to render you into the most humble human being on the face of the earth. The reason I say that is you write all this code to have the program, have the computer or the device do a certain thing. And then you say, okay, run that code, and it starts to run, and then it breaks. And every time that it breaks, it's because it's stopping at the point where what you wrote actually doesn't make any sense. And so It's your job to go back and figure out, what is it that I wrote that doesn't make any sense? That's what debugging is. Debugging is just going back over and over and over and over and over again, finding all the little ways that you wrote code that didn't make sense. And when you've done that for a while, it's amazing. After writing just 100 lines of code, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but in the context of computer programming, it really isn't a lot of code. You go through trying to make that 100 lines of code work perfectly. You just run into so many different situations as you're playing with that code where what you wrote didn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. And that thing is always about 3 lines back from where you think it is.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Because the error messages don't tell you anything about what it is. Processor error. Oh, thank you very much. I knew that.
Oh, yes. So that's an interesting thought, though, that what you said to start that story about humbling us.
Oh, it really does humble you. Oh, yeah.
And I think that all of these things, even though we're joking and saying, "Oh, I hate the law of attraction," all of it's part of the process. Even when it, and I'm making air quotes over here, even when it doesn't work, because it always works. But even when it doesn't work the way we think it should be working, like the computer code, it's still part of the learning process and part of our human process. And so it's okay. Trust the process and just keep going.
It's a reminder to me that when I'm trying to apply the law of attraction and I'm not getting the results that I want to get, it means I wrote the code wrong. And I have to go back and I have to find where the bug is in the code.
Right.
Which means, once again, the responsibility is mine. It's up to me to do something about it. It's not up to somebody else. It's not somebody else's thing to fix. It's mine to fix.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of power in that if we'll look at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
If we'll recognize that we don't have to depend on someone else to fix it. We don't have to wait for someone else to change their behavior.
That's right.
We can step up and take responsibility, and that's a very empowering place to be, knowing that we can change it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so Neville says the subconscious is the womb of creation. It receives the idea unto itself through the feelings of man. It never changes the idea received, but always gives it form. Hence, the subconscious outpictures the idea in the image and likeness of the feeling received. To feel a state as hopeless or impossible is to impress the subconscious with the idea of failure. That's something we definitely don't want to be doing.
But it's also how you write buggy code. That's an example of it. That's how you write a code that doesn't work the way you wanted it to. It produces a result that was different from what you had in mind. Does that mean you should ignore it? No, it just means that's what you wrote.
Right, and we realize that, this particular idea about hopelessness or something being impossible, I always want to address that right away whenever I see it in a client or whenever I see it in myself, because we can't create anything from hopelessness.
No. Well, nothing that we want anyway.
Yeah, except just more reasons to feel hopeless.
Exactly.
And so, but once it doesn't really take all that much to give us hope, to restore our hope.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And once our hope is restored, then we can move towards faith, which is where we start knowing we can create something. So it's important to recognize. Although the subconscious faithfully serves man, it must not be inferred that the relation is that of a servant to a master, as was anciently conceived. Now, here we're going to get into a lot of New Testament stuff that I may vehemently disagree with.
Well, we'll just put the decoder ring on. That makes it easier to handle.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. So that's going to be important.
Okay.
And we also realize it was 1944.
This is true.
The ancient prophets called it the slave and servant of man. Okay, so he's talking about the subconscious. The ancient prophets called it the slave and servant of man. St. Paul personified it as a woman, and woman is in quotes, and said the woman should be subject to man in everything. The subconscious does serve man and faithfully gives form to his feelings. However, the subconscious has a distinct distaste for compulsion and responds to persuasion rather than to command. Consequently, it resembles the beloved wife more than the servant.
Yeah, you're right. This is one of those phrases where your skin crawls as you read it.
Well, but if we realize what Neville is saying, he's saying, and I love that he's allowing St. Paul to be, to be able to take credit for St. Paul personifying the subconscious as a woman. I'm not really sure that. I think Paul may have been being a little more literal here. I don't think he was having his Neville decoder ring, and that when he said the woman should be subject to a man and everything, I don't think Paul was talking about the subconscious, but I'm glad that Neville saw it that way.
Personally, I think Paul was probably dipping into the sacramental wine, but okay, I'll take your argument.
So Neville says, the subconscious does serve man and faithfully gives form to his feelings. However, and I like this. I think there's some truth here. The subconscious has a distinct distaste for compulsion and responds to persuasion rather than to command. He says that in his mind, that causes the subconscious to resemble a beloved wife more than a servant or a slave. I'm okay with all of that. What I see is that if we look at it from a human standpoint and we just toss out the gender, most people are going to have a distaste for compulsion and respond better to persuasion, right? That's why we say, well, let me persuade you.
That's right.
Right? So,
and that's why we're such failures when we do try to persuade somebody else, because we're really trying to compel them. We won't admit to it, but that's what we're trying to do. Right.
And we respond better to persuasion. In other words, and a lot of times, persuasion is something that's tapping into our feelings. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So he's going to start the next paragraph with a verse from Ephesians. He says, the husband is head of the wife. I'm just imagining someone that's just tuning in, like, I'm never listening to that woman again.
This is like only knew. Picasso. I'm imagining this Picasso piece with literally a head, the husband's head on the wife is like, well, what the heck is this?
So I love that Neville goes to say that may not be true of man and woman in their earthly relationship, but it is true of the conscious and the subconscious, or the male and female aspects of consciousness. The mystery to which Paul referred when he wrote, "This is a great mystery. He that loves his wife loves himself, and they two shall be one flesh," is simply the mystery of consciousness. Now see where Neville is? This is why I love Neville. Consciousness is really one and undivided. But for creation's sake, and I would put the word conscious creation's sake in there, it appears to be divided into two. The conscious...
The word appears, that to me is the big word in the sentence. It appears to be divided into two. And I
Right.
don't think it actually is divided into, but we often treat it as if it is. That's what we
Right.
were referring to earlier when we talked about the common model about what the subconscious mind is. And it's useful to do that. It's useful to describe it that way. But I think it's actually true that it's only an appearance. It's not a reality.
Yeah, and he says consciousness is really one. It's
Mhm.
undivided.
Yeah,
But for creation's sake, it appears to be divided into two. The
right.
conscious, objective, or male aspect truly is the head and dominates the subconscious, subjective, or female aspect. However, this leadership is not that of the tyrant, but of the lover. So by assuming the feeling that would be yours, were you already in possession of your objective, the subconscious is moved to build the exact likeness of your assumption. Your desires are not subconsciously accepted until you assume the feeling of their reality, for only through feeling is an idea subconsciously accepted, and only through this subconscious acceptance is it ever expressed. It's easier to ascribe your feelings to events in the world than to admit that the conditions of the world reflect your feelings, right?
Right. Oh yeah.
I feel this way because of what's going on. No,
It
what's going
made me
on is
feel that way.
because
It
of your
made me
feelings.
do it. I didn't. It wasn't me at all.
Right. However, it is eternally true that the outside mirrors the inside. And that's a hermetic principle, right? As within, so without. Oh, and then he says, as within, so without. Thank you,
Oh,
Neville.
there it is. Yeah.
As above, so below. As below, so above. As within, so without. As without, so within. Correspondence is the second of the seven principles of Hermes Trismegistus. Oh, my gosh, he's like quoting Hermes now. I'm really revved up. A man can receive nothing unless it's given him from heaven. And the kingdom of heaven is within you. Nothing comes from without. All things come from within, from the subconscious. It's impossible for you to see other than the contents of your consciousness. Your world, in its every detail, is your consciousness objectified. Objective states bear witness of subconscious impressions. A change of impression results in a change of expression. The subconscious accepts as true that which you feel as true. And because creation is the result of subconscious impressions, you, by your feeling, determine creation. You are already that which you want to be. And your refusal to believe this is the only reason you do not see it. To seek on the outside for that which you do not feel you are is to seek in vain, for we never find that which we want. We find only that which we are. Now he's quoting the Talmud, but he doesn't say it. In short, you express and have only that which you are conscious of being or possessing. To him that hath, it is given. Denying the evidence of the senses and appropriating the feeling of the wish fulfilled is the way to the realization of your desire. Mastery of self-control of your thoughts and feelings is your highest achievement. That's something to put on a post-it note and stick on your desk.
It's true.
Mastery of self-control of your thoughts and feelings is your highest achievement. However, until perfect self-control is attained, so that in spite of appearances, you feel all that you want to feel, use sleep and prayer to aid you in realizing your desired states. These are the two gateways into the subconscious, and that's where we'll pick up next time.
That's good. That's the end of the chapter, but yeah, it draws a nice line there. And I love 4 or 5 paragraphs back. It says, "You are already that which you want to be, and your refusal to believe this is the only reason you do not see it." And that's exactly what I know I've been wrestling with since I started learning about the law of attraction. But it's true. But nevertheless, for various reasons, I keep resisting it. I keep learning different ways to put the resistance aside over time. But that's it. That's the battle right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I really love this book.
Well, then we're going to continue it. Not this afternoon. This afternoon, we're going to do a guided meditation that we're going to be live streaming to the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group on Facebook. So you want to tune into that. But we'll definitely pick this
Yes.
up next week and go down to
Perfect.
chapter 2 of the book. So, yeah, good stuff. Before we go, Cindie, how does somebody reach out to you as a life coach?
They can reach out to me on my website, cindiechavez.com, CINDIECHAVEZ. I'd love to hear from you.
There we go. All right. Well, then I will talk to you this afternoon when we do a guided meditation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well. We hope that you'll join us as well next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.